Good evening. I'm your host, Suzanne, and this is Recovery Matters. I'm here today with my guest, Terry Marvin. Hi, Terry. So good to have you on the show.
Hi, Suzanne. Thanks for having me.
Terry is the program director, a therapist for all first responders at the Recovery Team, Inc. in North Palm Beach. Terry is a retired lieutenant with Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office and has over 30 years of service. Wow, that's quite a track record there.
It's a long run, that's for sure.
So today we're actually talking about first responders and substance abuse and really where they go for help. So let's start with at the beginning. How do our perceptions of first responders impact their willingness to get treatment? Because we hold them in such high esteem and such high expectation and regard, that must make it harder to be able to say you're struggling.
It does. It certainly does. It's, law enforcement, firefighters, paramedics, all the first responders, corrections people. I mean, they're the helpers. They're the ones that are doing, helping others with their struggles, and they never see themselves as being in a position to be helped. So it's a very difficult population, just in general.
And how often are our first responders impacted by substance abuse? What kind of rates are we looking at?
Quite often. I mean, you look at society today and the things that happen. Think of the Sandy Hook and the first responders there that walked in and saw 26 slaughtered children. I mean, you just don't go home from that and everything is as normal. It's a very high rate, and it's getting higher.
Wow. When we look at the long-term effect of first responders, and I guess what I mean by that is, so say in our business every day in substance abuse counseling, we hear traumatic events from our clients of what they've experienced and been through. But what's it like for a first responder who's in that every day, so to speak? What are the long-term effects on them?
Well, it mounts over time. The professions, first responder professions, have a lot of, they stuff a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. You can go through a run of a week of really traumatic things that happen, and you put all that stuff in, and over time it builds up, and it's got to come out some way. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times we turn to substance abuse to numb some of those feelings we're having.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other ways that we see it coming out in first responders apart from substance abuse?
Yeah, you see, the suicide rates are very, very high. We know for a fact that more policemen, for instance, are kill themselves with guns than are killed by guns on the street. So, that's a very alarming statistic.
And is it different for, say, policemen versus firefighters versus corrections officers? Do each segment of the population kind of hold it differently or are recognized to have impacted differently?
No, because you see a lot of the same things, the death, the tragedy. Think of the firemen who go into, burning homes where there's no survivors and people actually are killed in the homes or buildings, and the EMTs, you see the horrific accidents and their attempts to save lives and people who literally die in their arms. And so it's a broad spectrum of all of that.
So let me ask you this, because I did a show the other day on injury in football, and it was understood, I guess, by mates, players who go into the football league, that there was a certain injury component and as a result pain meds and what have you. When we look at first responders, is there that sort of understanding that this is part of the repercussions of the job? I mean, how do you approach that?
No, absolutely. I mean, it is understood. However, first responders are human beings too, and as hard as you may try or you may want to not let these things bother you, at times they're going to bother you. And especially going back to the, stuffing it over years like that, I mean, at some point it's going to come out.
So when we look at programming and specific needs for first responders, first of all, why the need to separate them from the everyday population? Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure, and it's not a total separation. We found that does not work either, because a lot of times first responders coming in, it's a us against them mentality, like I don't belong with these people, when what we really want, we know that the disease of addiction, for instance, it's not prejudice. It affects everyone, men, women, children, all races, all professions. So we don't want to totally segregate the populations. However, there has to be a component in the treatment that is germane to their specific jobs. People they can talk to have been through what they've been through, especially coming into treatment. That's a really tough thing for some of these first responders that, see themselves as apart from something like that, and they need someone they can sit down with and say, hey, I've been here, I've done what you're about to do, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, it's not a train, it's okay, so it's important.
When you talk about your background on the Sheriff's Department, how did you cope with some of these things? I mean, what was the impact on your 30 years there?
Well, I didn't know it, but, I had a lot of things that were going wrong in my life that I didn't realize at the time, and I went through some substance abuse issues myself, and that's why I got into this field, having gone through it myself, the loneliness of going through it without having someone there and to guide me and to show me, how things were going to be at the other side. It was tough, so that's how I got
Was there a first responders program at the time when you needed it, or no?
No, there was nothing available like that.
Right. So how available are these programs now, and who provides them?
Well, there's not a lot, that's for sure, just because that is one of the toughest populations to get into treatment, simply because what we talked about in the beginning, we're seen as the helpers, not the helpless. So you're not going to get these people walking in off the street saying, hey, I got a problem, I need help. It's going to take a precipitating event, or a chief, a sheriff, a fire chief, whatever the case may be, to say, hey, you got a problem, you need help, you need to go for treatment. Mm-hmm. That's how we get those populations in. Same with the corrections officers. They deal with so much every day. I mean, they're literally locked in jail for their shift. And, the things they see and they have to put up with, and it's the same with them.
So when you say that we have to then depend on fire chiefs and police chiefs and wardens and things like that to recognize signs and symptoms, what are some of the signs and symptoms that may be helpful for them to look for that one of their crew is struggling?
You start to see people lose their edge. You start to see them, they're not as sharp, they're not as on cue as they normally are. You notice things, you start asking them, hey, you all right? Is everything okay? And of course you get that, yeah, everything's fine, don't worry about it. You see things like patterned sick leave, where every Monday, so-and-so isn't showing up for work.
Right.
You start to notice that there's either hidden phone calls or phone calls that you can tell there's some type of domestic going on over the phone. Mm-hmm. Substance abuse carries over into the home and affects all the families. So you see a lot of marital issues coming up when the substance abuse kicks in.
Mm-hmm. When you think about customizing groups within treatment for our first responders, what kind of needs do they have that are different from regular substance abuse programming?
Well, the main thing most of them come in there with is, fear for their job.
Right.
They need to know that that if they're with a progressive agency, kind of like the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, where Sheriff Rick Bradshaw is very pro-treatment. They need to know that that's his stance, that if you come here, you get treatment, and you move on, everything's going to be okay. Right. And that dark cloud hanging over you about your job is not as bad as it seems if you do the right thing. And a lot of agencies are swinging towards that mode. I was very fortunate yesterday to have a person come into our facility. The chief of police and his sergeant actually drove him down, which I thought was just amazing.
Incredible.
And to see that an agency is that proactive and they care about their policemen that much, really, it felt good.
Now, do they also have EAP sort of lines of opportunity to get help, or do they use those services?
The best one out there is a group called Safe Call Now. It's a confidential 24-hour hotline that any first responder can call and get help. And it's better than any of the EAPs out there, because it's run by a gentleman, Sean Riley, who went through all of this himself and has dedicated his life to helping the first responders. And that's where we get a lot of our clientele through that.
Okay.
Through that agency.
So when we talk, you bring up a good point about returning back in the field. How hard is it once you go and kind of get some help for that trauma and perspective and some help on that substance abuse behaviors? How hard is it to re-enter again and still suffer, be exposed to traumas and difficult situations?
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, and you brought up earlier about, what needs to be different in that setting, and people need to know that going back to work isn't as difficult as they think it's going to be. It's everybody else you're thinking about or worrying about that's thinking about you, they have their own issues going on, their own problems at home with their kids, or, their bills that aren't getting paid, or whatever the case may be, and you got to tell people you're really not that important,
right.
That everybody's focus is not going to be on you. Sure, there's going to be some talk and whatnot, but the bottom line is, and I saw this personally, is that everybody just wants you to get better. That's all they care about, and the rest of it is just, it just doesn't matter.
What are some of the underlying mental health issues that they may also be struggling with on top of substance abuse or addictive behaviors?
Depression, probably the biggest. That's the one we see the most, whether it's situational or, true, onset of, severe depression. But that's probably the biggest one. You see health issues start coming in, and they stop taking care of themselves. It should be a job where you stay in shape and you eat right and you do the things you're supposed to do. You see that, heart disease comes into play a lot.
What about panic and anxiety?
Sure, a lot of anxiety, and that's exacerbated by substance abuse itself. A lot of people turn to things like the benzos, the Xanax and Valiums and things like that to deal with the anxiety, which only makes matters worse.
So let's talk a bit about the families, because we know in general substance abuse is a family disease. But when we're talking about our first responders, what is the impact to the families, and what does that relationship look like, and how does that play out?
Well, it's big because the spouses and family members are the ones that first see what's going on with our first responders. They see the tension, they see the isolation, the anger, the mood swings, all of those things. And addiction is a family disease. It affects everyone in the house, right down to the dog. And so a program has to have a family component. We're very fortunate. Our family program, is run by my wife.
Really?
Yes, Annette, and she does a fantastic job with us, and she gets families involved with Al-Anon, Nar-Anon, and some of the other help groups. She chairs different meetings, and we put together a family weekend every couple months where we bring the families and the clients together for a workshop weekend. It's really, really good stuff.
Because families have to learn sort of the tools to realign themselves as well, right, with coping with the stress. This isn't just stress on the first responder. It's got to be stressful on the families too, having their husband or their loved one always running into danger. That can be pretty scary. It's
very stressful, and especially when the problems are being brought home and the family life is starting to deteriorate as a result.
Right.
You can't treat one without treating the other.
How do you try to build trust amongst first responders to open up and to share? Because that must be hard in a group setting. I mean, like you say, they're so used to, I'm the helper here. So how do I let go and kind of let my walls down?
That is the absolute toughest thing that we do when we get them in there. That's why your question was so good about, what has to be different for these programs. You have to get them with other first responders who have been through what they're about to walk through. You have to get them, we're very fortunate in this county, we have an AA meeting that is strictly for first responders. It's held every Monday night, and the first thing I do is get these guys and girls into that meeting where they're sitting in a room full of people who have been through what they're about to go through, who can tell them, look, just know that the disease isn't discriminatory. It affects everyone. And at the end of the day on the street there's good guys and bad guys, but in here it's a disease. We all have it. We all need to get better. And eventually the walls start coming down. And some terrific stories of that population integrating with, you know, non-first responder population, and how they've come together, and some still remain friends to this day, and
Wow.
it's just it's really good to see.
So now tell me about, is there a way, and I was just kind of thinking about this, we design programs to help rehabilitate, but is there a way to have preventative measures for first responders so that maybe they don't get to that point of using? Have there been any thoughts or initiatives around that?
Again, I can only speak for the local areas, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, for instance. I know that the sheriff has a very proactive mental health unit, and they try and get in there right from the get-go, and they promote programs in the agency that talk about what we've been talking about here, how to avoid these pitfalls, and how to recognize when you're starting to become, you know, involved in something you're going down the wrong road.
Okay. So tell us now a little bit about your program and why it's you know, been so helpful and the successful outcomes that it's had.
We're the recovery team. We're located on North Lake Boulevard in North Palm Beach. It was originally Recovery Resources, started by Bill Schrader and Fred Pedersen back in 1995. Last year in January, we went through a name change and some ownership stuff where I came on board as one of the owners, and I brought the first responder component to the facility. We've had great success. As I mentioned, we've teamed up with Safe Call in dealing with their national, their hotline. We're contracted with the state of Massachusetts for all their correctional officers, so we deal with them. And with the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, it's been my biggest population through the facility, and treated many men and women from there. And so we're having a lot of success. As I said earlier, it's hard to get these folks in.
Right.
You know, having been that person myself, I knew how hard it was for me. But you know, once we get them in, we've had some pretty good success rates.
Are there any, you know, it's always nice to hear a happy ending to a story. Is there anyone that stands out, or any situation that stands out that had a really successful outcome?
Yeah, I see. There's a gentleman who retired, who went through the program, and he's you know, he's there every week. He brings these law enforcement and first responder people to that meeting I told you about. You know, he just on his own just come and does those things for us. And I have several people that, you know, remain active with our facility, just calling up from time to time. Hey, what can I do to help? Do you need anything? You know, I have a firefighter who comes by every once in a while just to help out in the kitchen.
Yeah.
You know, just to give back. I got a couple that you know, a lot of the guys play cards in our sober houses. They come back and still play cards with the guys at the house and stuff like that. So it's when it works, it's a very fulfilling thing
And
to
what
see.
made you so passionate about wanting to develop this program and make it available to our first responders?
Just because it's not out there, and having been through it, like myself, I told you, you know, going through it alone and having no idea what the other side of this looked like was very unpleasant. You know, I've seen and been through a lot in my career, and that was probably one of the toughest things I ever had to do, because I knew what danger was. I knew, you know, what I had to do to get through the difficult, you know, situations I was in. When I got involved in this, I didn't know what was involved. I didn't know how to get through it. So, you know, I was fortunate to be able to retire at an early age and take on career number 2. And that's where I've dedicated myself and my resources to giving back what was so freely given to me.
Wow. And when we talk about trauma treatment and getting through the danger, what kind of trauma treatments are used to help first responders in programming? Are they doing EMDR, or what are they doing for that?
EMDR is probably the biggest, and we have that as well, along with a state-of-the-art biofeedback system, which is really incredible, and it's having some great results. It's a platform, much like a bed with it's not a fully reclined bed, but it's filled with sound and vibration, and you wear headphones, and there's meditations, voice-guided, music-guided. There's also visuals. You have a nice HD screen with different things you can put up there, and it's all therapeutic. There's grief and trauma, loss of, you know, job stuff, you name it, there's programs for everything, and it's just very, producing some very good results for us.
Wow. How long is treatment usually for first responders? I mean, typically in substance abuse treatment, we're seeing 30, 60 days, depending on the drug of choice, but how long is it for first responders?
Well, we try and gear that towards the individual, and again, very fortunate to be working with local law enforcement here. We've developed a trust to where if we say to them, hey, the 30 days really wasn't enough, you know, they'll extend the leave or whatever they have to do. But generally, agencies want their people back, you know, and 30 days is usually the amount of time that we spend.
So, Terry, tell me, why is it important that we recognize, or first responders recognize, that substance abuse is a disease? How does that change the mentality of them going for treatment?
Well, as far back as 1956, the AMA designated addiction as a disease, and it's taken many, many, many years to get to the point where it's actually been treated like one. You know, we know it's a disease, it's definable, it's primary, it's chronic, it's progressive. If untreated, it's fatal. It meets all that criteria, so why don't we treat it like a disease? So luckily, you know, some agencies are becoming more progressive towards the treatment. Let's face it, agencies who have people on board, they have a lot of money tied up in that individual through training, through you know, all the different areas, years of service, and they're vested in retirement systems. I mean, it's just they're a valued part of that agency. And you know, through my years of coming up, I saw two sides of the coin. You were either one of the good old boys, whatever you do got swept under the rug, and there was never anything that would happen to you, or you weren't part of the good old boy club, and you got fired. That was the two methods of dealing with addiction. Now we see agencies becoming more progressive and actually dealing with it as a disease, putting their people into treatment, you know, having them, you know, come out, sign last chance agreements, stay in programs, and make sure that they follow through with their commitments to recovery. And if they do, they've saved that person who still feels that they're a vital part of that agency, and they've saved themselves a ton of money by, you know, not having to go out and start all over with somebody else.
So I have a little, it's an interesting question. It may be a little bit off the track, but it's really important. I'm thinking of someone who was a volunteer firefighter, so not directly hired as a first responder, and actually they were in 9/11 or helped with some of the things that they needed to help with down there, and they struggle with some of the same things you talk about being a first responder. Is it treated differently if it's on a volunteer basis versus if it's actually a hired and paid position? Like, would someone like that still qualify for first responder? Like many community members become first responders when there's tragedy that happens.
Sure.
What happens there?
Sure, no, they're one and the same. I mean, there's no difference other than they're not on somebody's payroll.
Right.
You know, the things they see and do are all the same.
Right. So the access to treatment would be the same, and
sure, and the need is the same as well. Sure.
Okay, good to know. All right, Terry, we need to give our audience some information about how they can get a hold of you. So let's start with info on Safe Call Now, because that seems like an important resource.
Sure, it really is. And they are 24-hour confidential hotline is 1-206-459-3020. And they have call takers standing by all 24 hours a day.
And they can, what you do is first call them, and they can direct you on to treatment facilities who can cater to first responders?
Right. They've set up something they call their Core 4. There are 4 strategically placed treatment centers throughout the United States. The recovery team, us being one of them.
Okay.
But depending on the geographic location or specific need, they're very familiar with the needs of the individuals they place.
And if someone wants to contact you directly, maybe a family member about a first responder who may need help, or a first responder themselves, how can they get a hold of you?
We have a 1-800 number. It's 1-800-817-1247, and just leave a message and ask for me, and I'll certainly return your call. Or we have a local number as well, 882-9821, and that's directly to our office.
Well, I can't thank you enough for talking about this topic and educating us, and like you say, our need to help the helpers and really make treatment more accessible to them and make them understand that in addition to what they do for us, we